All right. Before we get started, I just want to make a quick announcement that dinner tonight is already included in your registration fee. So we do hope to see everyone at what is called the underground restaurant at York University. We'll show you, the way later on if you need help, and yeah, that's all I can say about dinner, I guess. For those who haven't had a chance to register, we also have a way to deal with the food issues. So just come and see us. Yeah, so that is an additional footnote to my earlier remark on dinner. Okay, welcome everyone to this Keynote to 2017 Canadian Council for Southeast Asian Studies Conference. I'm delighted to introduce our keynote, Beng Lan, Professor Beng Lan from National University of Singapore. I am supposed to also give a little bit of a contextual remark, I guess. Southeast Asian studies would probably be almost inconceivable without the discipline of anthropology, I should say. And as we also know, anthropology, is a very important subject matter. It is one of these fields that has a task to study what was then called non-Western societies. And what is distinctive about this discipline is that unlike what we call Orientalist studies, anthropologists have to go to the field. They have to meet people. They have to know the language. Yeah. So they have to be friends with people who are in the field. And yet at the same time, being an anthropologist, a field constructed, say, during colonial time, inevitably, there's always this formation of self and other. Yeah. So the other would be, people who are in the field, people whom anthropologists study, right? Now, it is very interesting to later on realize that anthropology is also the field that begin to counter that kind of a, imperial history. Yeah, there has been increasing awareness over the idea of, who is the other, who is the self. And that kind of awareness, that kind of a formation of critical awareness, in a way it came out a lot from a sort of a new generation of anthropologists. And among the group that is so interesting to us when you think about restructuring knowledge are people who live there and then educated, right, in the discipline of anthropology. And they are now, sort of a generation who basically do anthropology work, but they themselves are part of that society. Yeah. And with that, this is what I know, of my friend, old friend Beng Lan, whom I knew about 20 years ago. We both were in New York University as a postdoc. We were much younger at that time. And I learned enormously from her, partly because, I begin to really appreciate, right, this whole notions of how, we are not only specialists of our field, but we are also members of particular society, and that become for me such an wonderful set of awareness that there's a lot of internal struggle as an anthropologist, like say we're born in Southeast Asia, who live in Southeast Asia and work in Southeast Asia. How are you going to reinterrogate this notion of self and other? Yeah, you are, quote unquote, you are the other, but you are also the self, right? So these generations, I believe, are the one that really make us aware of how difficult it is to be in between, to be able to appreciate what we call Western theories, Western method, but at the same time, try to come up with certain position that would allow us to speak, the voice, speak from below, speak from the field. So that struggle, I saw that, in Benglan for many years. The whole conversation we have had about modernity, about universalism, about the particular, about local knowledge, about voices. Those are, to me, really productive conversation. It's a continuing sort of intellectual engagement. And therefore, you would really see, I think the first book that Benglan produced, that was just like maybe 2 years after the NYU years, when Benglan went back to NUS and started to, in the end, become the chair of Southeast Asian Studies Department. The first book is called Modern Dreams. This has a wonderful subtitle. I don't quite remember now. An inquiry into power, cultural production, and the cityscape in contemporary urban Penang. Yeah, so there's a lot of story about domination. There's a lot of story about resistances. It's a consistent theme in Benglan's work. Yeah, resistance against what? Yeah, someone born and continue to live in Penang within the whole geo-national politics of Malaysia is also another fascinating topic. Yeah, being at the margin and at the same time look at the politics of Malaysia. All these things captured in that first book. We are looking at Eurasian community, right? Sort of a marginal group, and how they position themselves in the new context of Malaysia. And at NUS, what I remember about Benglan is that I was quite struck by the fact that the Department of Southeast Asian Studies could offer courses on post-colonial studies, yeah, on Foucault, It's fascinating. It's very difficult to find, Southeast Asian studies, right, anywhere, say in North America, who would, be so engaged with what we call theoretical question. And of course, Benglan being Benglan, this is not just about anthropological work. There's a whole struggle over epistemology, over the whole notion of Eurocentrism. Yeah. And therefore, the second book that came out, the book that she co-edited, is called Asia in Europe, Europe in Asia, Rethinking Academic, Social and Cultural Linkages. Yeah, so that is the whole idea of, how are you going to re-engage with Western knowledge, the so-called Eurocentrism. Make use of it without really denying it. It's a very interesting interrogation. In a way, it's a kind of a self-reflection as well. And the third book that came out, in some way, is all about voices. It's all about this idea of what if we begin to allow, new generation of Southeast Asianists who live in Southeast Asia think about Southeast Asia. Yeah. So that is the book that eventually is called Decentering and Diversifying Southeast Asian Studies. Yeah, in a way, it is about intergenerational dialogue. It's about the seniors who work on Southeast Asia, who are Southeast Asians, in some way compare them with voices, the new voices. So they are different generation. Yeah, and how they talk about themselves, how they locate themselves within existing scholarship, the kind of a struggle they have, is just an interesting book. Yeah, autobiographic a little bit, but it's consciously theoretical, and there's a marvelous introduction. Yeah, about that kind of a struggle. It's a long introduction, but that really in some way represent the voices of many young generation of Southeast Asians who are currently live and work in Southeast Asia. Okay, without further ado, let's welcome Goh Benglan to give us a keynote today. Thank you.
Thank you, Abidin, for the very kind introduction. He's an old friend. As you can see, we've known each other as very young post-grads, and I can't believe that it's been 20 years, that I'm so much older now. But anyway, time flies, and for many young ones here, I welcome you to the start of your career. So you will know with a wink and an eye, and you are there, the other end. So It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be invited. I would like to thank Abidin and the Council for this privilege to be amongst esteemed colleagues to share some of my ideas, which are not really yet mature, I think, because I'm still struggling to put them together. So what I'm going to do today is, actually, this is a poster of it's an artwork of a collage by an artist, but actually I'm not speaking about this topic today, but I used it as it was used as a poster for my talk. Oh, sorry. Okay. Right. Okay. My title today is on silent resistance in Malaysia, changing mindsets as new radical politics. So in this presentation, I will be looking at the quite spread of alternative ethno-religious imaginaries and practices that are in defiance of dominant, intolerant discourses as sites to rethink radical politics in a deeply divided society, Malaysian society. Now, my talk will be divided into 3 parts. I will start with a little bit of a background to what I call an incapacitated public sphere in the new millennium in Malaysia, and then we'll move on to 3 empirical examples which seemingly are disparate, but I'm trying to desperately trying to link them. And as you will see in the end, maybe there are loopholes there. But I will look at popular religion, artistic practices, and new citizenry initiatives as sites of alternative public sphere making. And I will end with a conclusion as kind of rethinking radical politics in terms of mindful politics of mindsets as a valid basis for revolutionary change. Now, since the new millennium, deep political divisions arising from a disembodied Islamic conservatism, which we were talking about in the panel for Judith, in the enmeshment between Malaysian ethno-religious nationalism and global Islamism, have severely debilitated political opposition and civil society, putting into question the future direction of radical politics in Malaysia. The new politics over Islam arises from divides between Islamists and their opponents over constitutional guarantees of religious freedom and human rights within Malaysia's multiracial body politic. The new public controversies over Islam were ignited by court rulings on conversion and apostasy in Islam, arising from gaps in the division of jurisdictions in the country's separate system of civil and Sharia courts, of which a 1998 amendment to Article 121A in the Malaysian Constitution sealed the power of the Sharia court over the civil one by prohibiting the civil courts from intervening in the areas of jurisdiction of the Sharia courts or of their decisions. Now, the first of the legal cases to throw this controversy into the open, triggering off a national uproar, was a legal tussle over the burial rights of a Malaysian hero, the Indian Mount Everest climber, M. Murthy, who was an army commando, at the end of 2005. Upon his death, Murthy's army colleagues claimed that he had converted to Islam and obtained a Sharia court ruling to uphold the right to give him a Muslim burial. His family members claimed his conversion to be untrue, but they were unable to represent themselves in the Sharia court because they were not Muslims to dispute the conversion. As recourse, his family turned to the civil court to contest the religious court's declaration, but they failed when the High Court ruled that it had no jurisdiction to review the Sharia court's decision. His family boycotted the burial ultimately, and as social tensions ran high, the burial was performed under heavy security with police convoy escorting the hearse to the cemetery. Now, apart from the question of religious rights over the dead, cases of forced separation of Muslims from the non-Muslim spouses and children worsened public anxiety over the growing powers of Islamic orthodoxy. Amongst this was a heart-wrenching case of a 40-year-old Indian woman named Rahima Bibi, who was adopted by Indian Muslim parents as a child, but who led a Hindu life after her marriage to an Indian man who never converted. Their illegal union was only discovered in 2007 when they enrolled their eldest child in school, and copies of the identity cards were submitted to the Education Department, which led to knowledge by the Selangor Religious Department. Upon this discovery, the Religious Department forcefully took Rahima and her children away from her husband, from the husband for rehabilitation. In response, the husband filed a habeas corpus application in the High Court, alleging the illegal detainment of his wife and children by the Religious Department. High social acrimony saw a compromise in this case by the Religious Department, which allowed the children to be raised as Hindus, whereby the High Court granted the husband custody of the children. The price was, however, paid by Rahima, who had to live apart from her husband. Now, the worst of public acrimony was over the case of apostasy. In 2007, Malaysian society was deeply divided over the case of a female Malay Muslim apostate known as Lina Joy, a name which has now become a household name in Malaysia. Born a Muslim and originally named Azlina Jailani, Lina Joy became a Catholic in 1998, whereupon she changed her name. Her battle began in 1997 when she first applied to the National Registration Department to change her name on her identity card in order to marry her partner. She fought for a legal recognition of a renunciation of Islam all the way up to the highest of Malaysia's civil courts, the Federal Court, but failed. This case led to hostilities not seen before, death threats sent to Lina as well as to her lawyers, and Molotov cocktail thrown into the compound of the Malaysian Bar Council office. Now, in response to these court rulings, loose coalitions championing and opposing Islamic powers were quickly formed. In Murthy's case, the Malaysian Consultative Council of Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, and Sikhism, which you can see here, MCCBCHS, the country's main interfaith civil society, organized a candlelight vigil in front of the Kuala Lumpur High Court on that very evening of the judgment. In Lina Joy's case, Islamic groups held a vigil outside the Malaysia Palace of Justice on the day of the court decision, whereby the court ruling was greeted by shouts of "Allah is great" from the crowd. This rule over religious freedom saw uncompromising positions and led to protracted hostilities as both sides organized public forums and demonstrations to champion their positions. For Islamist groups, the supremacy of the Sharia courts in deciding on Islamic matters was unquestionable, and they wanted the powers of this religious court strengthened. They referred to the status of Islam as the official religion of Malaysia, official religion in Malaysia's constitution, to support their claims and criticize arguments of religious freedom as ignoring the special position of Islam. For the opponents, the supremacy of the federal constitution and civil courts in adjudicating on religious freedom was absolute, and they wanted the reassurance of this guarantee. The fundamentally opposing positions between the two camps led to political stalemates and protracted street protests and even violence. There was mayhem and nasty encounters as these factions jostled with each other to push their own agendas, where some public forums were forcefully shut down by rowdy crowds. Now, in 2010 and 14, conflicts escalated and became violent in response to court rulings on the ban of the use of the word Allah by the Catholic Church, which saw Molotov cocktail attacks on churches in both Kuala Lumpur and Penang. Today, the zealous behavior of Islamic religious councils continue to erode Muslim freedom and widen ethno-religious conflicts as the issue decreased to ban, amongst other things, yoga practice, festivity greetings by Muslims to their non-Muslim friends for Christmas and Deepavali, or the Indian Festival of Light, Western-style music concerts, and just this very month, just a couple of weeks ago, the cancellation of the popular beer festival, Oktoberfest. Altogether, the politicization of Islam has eroded the basis of Malaysian political mobilization in three major ways. First, there is a loss of hope in political opposition to take over the state, as internal bickering over Islam had led to the collapse of the opposition alliance, derailing plans for a united opposition front in the coming 2018 elections. Second, there's an equal loss of hope in civil society to bring about change, as civil society is deeply divided, downright the middle, by groups advocating for Islam and for those defending secularism. Third, the politicization of Islam has blurred, confused, and made indecipherable traditional political, class, and ideological cleavages. Yet, out of impotence also grew possibilities. The bigotry and futility in a highly charged public sphere have pushed some to seek alternative political expressions at the everyday and subterranean levels. I will first turn to a Muslim folk religion. First is the case of the Keramat. I'd written about the migration of the Keramat cult into urban centers in the 1990s economic boom via the acts of property developers, small entrepreneurs, and non-Muslim worshippers, which led to the proliferation of Keramat cults in new urban housing estates, commercial centers, factory complexes, and along urban roads and expressways. Now, Keramat is a popular Muslim saint worship that draws on a mixture between Malay and Indian-derived Shia beliefs, Sufi mysticism or tasawwuf, and Malay animistic notions of souls or semangat throughout the natural world. Originally, the propitiations of Keramats was mostly found in rural areas by farmers, timber loggers, and fishermen, as the Keramat offers supernatural protection and harm from hazardous economic activities and natural calamities. However, as Muslims either gave up or were coerced into abandoning this folk religion in the process of Islamization, this cult became adopted by the Chinese and Indians, and as such moved into the urban landscape. In its urban migration, cross-transculturalism of Malay, Chinese, and Indian supernatural symbolisms is observed. On the one hand, the Keramat became Sinicized and renamed as Datuk Kong. Actually, where's the pointer? Is this red one? Yes. Never mind, it doesn't matter. It's okay, you'll figure it out, okay? So you'll see here that, where was I? So the words Datuk Kong, actually there's a, you see this, the last slide there with a red shrine with yellow cloth. Those three words are transliteration of the word Datuk Kong, Na Tu Kong, right, in Mandarin. Now the Datuk Kong, the two words, mean grandfather in Malay and Chinese respectively. But Kong is also an honorific title given to Chinese deities. So you see, on the one hand, the Sinicization of a Islamic popular religion. On the other, you see Islamic practices being incorporated into Chinese popular religion. The cross-transculturalism of the Keramat gave rise to new syncretic religious symbolisms. In the 1990s, the Keramat was largely represented by a small red heart with yellow banner, as I showed just now, denoting the name Datuk Kong in red Chinese characters. But by the late 1990s and into the new millennium, Datuk Kong shrines increasingly took on Malay Muslim symbolisms, with the emergence of figurines donning the Haji prayer or the caps, and the kain plakat or the sarongs worn during prayers, as you can see the last one over there. And actually this is commodification as well, because you can actually buy them off those Chinese, popular, those shops that you can actually buy literally a shrine, a small one that's under the tree, those can be bought, okay? Now, The tendency for the Chinese to venerate the Keramat alongside other Indian folk deities, like the Ganesha in this picture on the far right corner, next to the flags which represent actually 7 brothers, the Panglima, Datuk Panglima Hitam actually, 7 brothers, very legendary Keramat, all through Malaya Peninsula. And the next to it is actually a Ganesha, which is actually an Indian folk deity. Now, this new urban cult also created new inter-ethnic cooperation as the observation of halal food offerings saw Malay Muslims emerging as ritual entrepreneurs, as the Chinese and Indian worshippers turned to them for the supply of halal food or for the recitation of Quran at propitiation ceremonies. Now, in one of my case studies of a developer in near to where the university is, in one of the rituals, he had actually hired a pawang, a Muslim shaman, to read the Quran. He had hired an Indian priest, and he had hired a Chinese tanki, and this was part of the propitiation for the Keramat. Now, intrigue and curiosity over the hybrid symbolisms of the Keramat cult also led to its coverage in magazines, blogs, and new social media, spreading public imaginaries of this cult. The Keramat has also crept into contemporary art. A case in point is an installation work entitled Temporary Road in 2007. This work is a commentary on the interconnections between corruption, destruction, and hazards of urban road transportation. And the Datuk Kong Shrine, which is depicted here, okay, right, as you can see, yeah. Right, with its hybrid ethno-religious symbolisms, suggests that the Keramat has become part and parcel of Malaysia's urban ecology. Albeit a highly controlled Islam, this quiet syncretic cult continues to spread quietly in Malaysian cities, where the seat of power resides. It is a stubborn reminder of historical and alternative religious imaginaries that cannot be fully erased by bureaucratic power. My next case is actually the case of the now destroyed hybrid Islamic cult called Kerajaan Langit, or Sky Kingdom, literally. This is an Islamic cult which was located on the east coast state of Terengganu, the heartland of Islamic conservatism and the spiritual home of the Islamic opposition party PAS, because the leader hailed from there. This cult drew on a mixture of Hindu, Buddhist, and Christian cosmologies and promoted universal unity amongst all religions. It advocated a liberal belief in many paths, one God, many names, one God, and one sky kingdom for all religions. Its commune was noted for a colorful giant structure containing a huge teapot, as you can see, an umbrella, and a concrete boat, which were interconnected by walkways decked by Roman pillars and balustrades of wood and plaster. The huge teapot was said to signify the purity of water and its medicinal value, while the tall umbrella, adorned with bright yellow canopy, was said to represent the 9 planets in Hinduism and symbolize an abode for people to take shelter beneath God. The Sky Kingdom is said to have its beginnings in the 1980s, but came under limelight only in 1997 with the persecution of its followers. I believe it was 4 followers who were first persecuted for deviant Islamic practices by Islamic authorities. The cult's self-styled spiritual leader, named Arifin Muhammad, or more fondly known as Ayah Pin, or Father Pin, disappeared following this crackdown, but was eventually jailed for 11 months for apostasy in 2001. In 2005, the religious commune was destroyed. Ayah Pin passed away in 2016. There was much mystery around Ayah Pin when he was alive. Upon his death, hagiography made him into a legend. He was said to have been visited by the archangel Gabriel since he was a little boy. Popular beliefs have him as the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, Buddha, Shiva, and Prophet Muhammad. Believed to have died 17 times, he was said to have returned each time to save the lives of all people from all religions. Hagiography and the fantastic symbolisms of Sky Kingdom helped keep it alive in public and cyber imaginary. There are now 4 Wikipedia entries in English, 2 in English and 2 in Malay, on the cult and on Ayapin. There are also many blog sites. There's even an Australian SBS TV documentary on the Sky Kingdom, and you can actually just Google and you will see a documentary on it. And hearsay has it that followers of the cult are still present today, especially amongst university students and the Orang Asli community in Malaysia. Now, likewise, Sky Kingdom has collapsed into artistic practices. In 2016, the artist Azizan Paiman appropriated the cult's name, Kerajaan Langit or Sky Kingdom, for the title of a photography series. In this series, images of the artist himself, covered with a futuristic mask, carrying a briefcase, and sitting down in a chair in various open, rural, and urban spaces are featured. I show 2 photographs here, taken at the Palace of Justice and in Putrajaya, the Putrajaya Boulevard, the center of Malaysian state power. The choice of the word Sky Kingdom as the title of this satirical portrayal of power and those who hold power may be a punt by the artists, but the name whisks out poignant memories of this colorful, defiant cult, its transgressive beliefs, and its destruction, evoking a question of judgment to those who manipulate and control power. Now, the material and symbolic culture of the supernatural worlds of the Keramat and the Sky Kingdom provide reminders of trans-ethno-religious orders at the intersection of memory and deeper Malaysian history that stand in contrast to current exclusionary understandings of Islam. They constitute part of an ongoing dialogue of remembering the past, which have been otherwise silenced or forgotten, challenging mainstream interpretations of ethnic and religious identifications imposed by official discourse. My next example, I turn to artistic practices as a site for alternative commentaries on ethno-religious dogmas. The Mata Hati Boys, an artist collective, literally Mata Hati means eye of the soul. It's not the Mata Hati, the seductive, what do you call it, the seductive spy, right? So, but anyway, Mata Hati means eye of the soul. It's become, of course, now they are much older because they emerged in the early 1990s. They have now become a leading Malay Muslim art collective. And when they first emerged, they were noted to have paved the way by taking on previous Islamic taboos in their new conception of Malaysian art. Because since their arrival into the Malaysian contemporary art world, they started painting pictures that were loud and explicit, emotional representations of human figures, which disappeared in Malaysian contemporary art since the 1980s. And so when they came in as almost like a backlash. You know, the first series of work that they do were very loud, emotive figures, a return of the human figure, because from the 1980s to 90s, largely, Malaysian art was largely turned into kind of abstract, expressionist, or calligraphic card painting, you know, the JavaScript painting. Now, in the painting come installation entitled The Adab Beza, or No Difference, by one of the members, Hamir Soib, of this group. A family of pigs was depicted in a painting which was used to parody the problem of abortion and abandoned newborn babies, a phenomenon known amongst unmarried Muslim women, given the severity of Sharia penalties that could include a combination of a fine, a jail, and caning for such an offense. The use of the figure of the pig to lampoon that the pig takes care of the young versus the human being who throws away babies in latrines. Now, the use of the figure of the pig to lampoon human behavior is particularly potent when we consider how proscribed the pig is within Malaysian Islamic discourse, whereby even its Malay name babi, which is spelled B-A-B-I, has been widely replaced with an Arabic equivalent, khinzir, in what appears to be an attempt to make the mention of this animal in social discourse somewhat acceptable. I still remember one day I went home in the late 90s, and I was watching television, and this word khinzir kept appearing. So I was asking my sister, what is khinzir? Because I don't know what it meant. And she said, oh, don't you know now? You don't call the pig, you call it khinzir. So now the following debacles over the symbolization of the pig since the new millennium confirm the obsessive compulsion to expunge the depiction of pigs from social representations in Malaysia. In 2005, the Hollywood children's movie, Babe, B-A-B-E, was banned from Malaysian cinemas due to the subject of the film and the similarity of the English title with the Malay word babi. In 2014, the Malay Mail, a local tabloid, blackened out faces of pigs in a story on American farming, and this story was picked up by the BBC. And in 2016, the poster for an action fantasy movie on the Monkey King 2 by Golden Screen Cinemas, which was based on a Chinese novel about a monk who travels far and wide with his 3 disciples, one of them the half-man, half-pig disciple, so in this movie poster, the pig disciple was erased. Now, hence you see that the humanistic depiction of the pig in artistic practices is a strong retort to dehumanizing tendencies in conservative Islamic discourses. Now, my last example is on citizenry initiatives to reinscribe new national mindsets. Beyond political stalemates and over Islamic orthodoxy, there is a quiet but pervasive spread of new citizenry initiatives to combat religious fanaticism. These initiatives are made up of loose collectives of people who come together as and when the occasion requires. Some examples are collective efforts in cultural and historical mapping to create alternative histories, sometimes online museums, and transient collectives, and these are just examples. I don't have time to go into it, but there are many of these collectives. Most of them are by artists, but they're not necessarily only by artists. They're also by just young people of all walks of life. And they do all kinds of very, very interesting projects. The Sungai Lembing is actually an archive of a history of a tin mining town in which they have actually a whole library of leftist, Maoist books. So there are all these very interesting projects that are going on by young people on the quiet, and they work with the young, they work with the old, they work with workers, and usually this collective are also multi-ethnic. They may have a dominant group of one ethnicity, but they always transcend ethnicity. And also there's these transient collectives or transient events that come, that they organize, such as the I Want to Touch a Dog event in 2014 at an urban park organized by young Muslim. And this was in retort to a year before, in 2013, there was this Muslim woman who's a dog trainer, and she had on her Facebook uploaded a video of her bathing her dogs, and there was outcry, and she was arrested under the penal code for, what do you call it? I forgot what the charge was about, inciting hatred or something like that. And so this young man, this man in yellow t-shirt, he's the one who organized it. And it was attended by some 200 people. But of course, the newspaper, portrayed it, it was reported in the news, and it caught the wrath of religious authorities. And this poor young man came under severe attack, and criticism. I think he didn't receive any punishment by the religious authorities, but he was severely hounded. Now here, I'm not concentrating on this. I actually want to look at this one example of one collective or one citizenry. I don't know, I don't call them movement. I don't know what they are, but they are initiatives. So here is the case of the Saya Anak Bangsa Malaysia. And it's a loose coalition of like-minded people which was established in 2007 in response to a passionate article written by a young Malaysian entitled "Break the Shackles of Tribal Thinking," which was posted on a popular Malaysian blog, which sparked off very earnest discussions over the internet. It was over the ethnic stereotype, was over racism, was over religious bigotry, and so this Saya Anak Bangsa Malaysia was actually set up, in response to debates in the internet. Now, this coalition is not the usual social movement. It has both virtual and real presence. It has even a charter, and amongst its commitments are to engender a national mindset, to think and act first and foremost as Malaysians, and second, to engage the hearts and minds of our people, to rise above the social constructs and divisive forces of ethnicity, faith, color, class, or gender. Its website invites contributions, opinions, and photos from ordinary Malaysians on everyday history, on stories of the past, of the present, or the future, and in the process builds up an archive of alternative Malaysian narratives on social life, history, outlooks on ethnicity, religion, and so on. Membership is loose, if not ambiguous, and members are described on its website as, I quote, "We are citizen volunteers, commoners, faceless perhaps, but not spineless. We are non-partisan. We come from diverse backgrounds, we have different temperaments, different shapes and sizes, and we are of different ages. Different yet the same no less," unquote. Certainly, the ideals around this coalition is its force. This coalition is kept alive as members who identify with it organize Saya Anak Bangsa Malaysia neighborhood get-togethers. To date, Saya Anak Bangsa Malaysia has chapters in majority of Malaysian cities, and with even an overseas chapter in Melbourne, Australia, formed by Malaysian students studying there. One of their projects is the One People, One Nation country-wide roadshow in 2009 to promote interfaith dialogue and discussions over the federal constitution. And it used the place. It used a very little known private recreational club in Penang called the HUYUSIA to launch this nationwide roadshow. Now the choice, and this is the building, this is the HUYUSIA building. Yet the choice of this building was no accident, as this club has an inspirational social cultural history. Only a small marble plaque, right, mounted on the wall in the main hall of this building provides a clue to its splendid past. This plaque marks the foundational stone laid by Nobel laureate, poet, and philosopher Rabindranath Tagore, who inaugurated the building in 1927. The HUYUSIA, or the FUYUSA, or literally League of Helping Friends, was established as a cultural literary association in 1914. Established by mostly English-educated straight Chinese intellectuals, politicians, and journalists, this association opened its membership to Indians, to Malays, and other races. The name of the association is derived from a phrase from the Confucian Analects, which states that the superior man associates with his friends, and by means of literary studies and pursuits, and by this friendship helps his own virtue. Now, in an age prior to Foucauldian thought, this association's motto was, "Knowledge is power." Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, the HUYUSIA served as the center of intellectual and social activities in Penang. In line with the spirit of the turn of the 20th century, its activities revolved around the quest for knowledge and deeper understandings of self and community. It ran a legendary discussion group known as the Lost Souls, which attracted people even outside of Penang at that time. The inaugural run of the One People, One Nation roadshow at FUYUSA, or HUYUSIA, marked the Saya Anak Bangsa Malaysia's attempt to reinscribe the institution's progressive social cultural history onto contemporary consciousness of young Malaysians. There is perhaps no better contrast than that of Huyusia's open-minded outlooks at the turn of the 20th century versus today's ethno-religious outlooks in Malaysia that are preoccupied with finding cultural authenticities and erecting barriers between the self and others. In using Huyusia to launch this nationwide initiative, this coalition also helped turn the now private space of this association back into a civic space that it once was. The virtual coverage of this event in new social media helped commemorate and spread the forgotten institutional history of inter-ethnic conviviality beyond the circle of participants. Now I conclude. The failure of opposition politics and civil society to challenge ethno-religious bigotries and bring political extreme into dialogue compels the search for critical renewal and efficacy beyond the formal political sphere for a more hopeful Malaysian future. Falling outside traditional scope of civil society, popular religion, artistic practices, and loose citizenry initiatives offer unusual sites, actors, ethic, and methodologies of radical resistance. These three developments do not fall neatly within conscious, coherent political movements. They also involve highly unusual suspects for political actors, such as property developers, petty entrepreneurs, urban dwellers, religious leaders and followers, artists, and concerned citizens, all of whom may not even consider themselves or their actions as political. Yet, in contrast to a debilitated, highly charged public sphere, these informal, marginal, and transient developments allow for free engagements and creative production of ethical commentaries that speak against narrow ethno-religious categorizations. Although seemingly disparate, these developments are interconnected by the internet and by their quality of enabling and inspiring the discursive production of ethno-religious imaginaries that defy current bigotries. Importantly, the alternative imaginations about religion, ethnicity, and humanity, which are either directly expressed or find their way into the internet, strike powerful chords with and are easily understood by fellow Malaysians. Altogether, the combined practices serve to bring into audibility and visibility neglected, if not silenced, convivial values and legacies of trans-ethno-religious cosmologies that recognize the interconnections and mutual constitution of ethno-religious identities in contrast to exclusionary and oppositional imaginaries in official conservative discourses today. These practices point to a new public sphere that is quietly in the making in Malaysia today. This new public sphere presents us with a scenario whereby supernatural, material, cultural, and aesthetic realms, facilitated by the internet, the very infrastructure for the spread of financial capitalism, can have a role in ethical political interventions beyond self-conscious political movements. This new public sphere has versatile, multi-level platforms of engagement, having both real and virtual dimensions that open up innovative, humorous, and promising ways of engaging with the deadly serious issue of religion or religiosity by either parodying the follies of contemporary ethno-religious chauvinisms or expose affinities, syncretic and overlapping ethno-religious identities that are erased by official discourses. These practices, whether conscious or unconscious, revolve around the recovery of suppressed or forgotten narrative of ethno-religious coexistence outside of state orders to forge a politics of respect, mutuality, and unity. Rather than possessing any political resolutions, these new politics appear to focus on the unlearning of official identity categories and the relearning of self and collective imaginings, encouraging Malaysians to see others in themselves and vice versa. so as to break down the walls of indifference. Their reclamations and representations of history, of past ethical traditions, and simple human decency show that radical politics may have to begin with efforts to undo dichotomous and hierarchical mindsets on ethno-religious identifications and to inculcate understandings of interconnectedness, of codependency, and mutual constitution of humanity on the whole. In a society where ethno-religious bigotries have invaded private identities and eradicated public debates, the seeds of revolutionary change may indeed lie in rendering a capacity for critical interrogation of impositions of self and community. Such quiet practices suggest that radical politics may have to begin with mindful transformation. I end here and we can open for discussions.